If you haven't played Genshin for a while and are considering coming back at one point, you should definitely log on within the next 3 weeks and do this event. Iktomi Spirit Seeking Scrolls. This video isn't about the event really, but about the weapon that comes alongside it. Calamity of Eshu. I've been playing Genshin since launch, and in terms of the fully free event weapons, this is one of the best I've seen in a long time in the right scenario. Unfortunately, since the event just came out, we can't refine it, but we can see what happens at rank 2. And as it is with a lot of weapons, not all of them for some reason, the passive at rank 5 gets doubled. So we're looking at 40% normal and charge attack bonus plus 16% crit rate for the same attacks. The main downside is that you have to be protected by a shield to get these buffs. With characters like Clorinde though, an incredibly good support, she can also make crystallize, which counts as a shield. Granted, crystallized shields aren't very strong, so you'll have to be decent at not getting hit, so you don't need a dedicated shielder like Zhongli. I feel like these days Zhongli is a bit underrated because his res shred isn't as big as Clorinde or Kazuha's, but it's also universal. So if you're using any of these units plus physical DPSs, these guys won't increase their damage. Anyway, a little off topic, I would like to actually raise this weapon, which I think would be the first event weapon I've raised in literal years. Before we move on to who I think it could be good for, we need to do a couple tests. Clorinde, for example. While she does a lot of her damage with elemental skill, the damage is considered normal attack damage. I assume this buff is a generic normal charge attack buff, which should affect her skill, but if you know anything about Genshin's wording, it's always worth testing and making sure. It shouldn't be too hard to test. We're just going to start her in Skyward Blade, get a team with just like Noelle and Clorinde for the shield requirement. We want to first make sure Noelle's shield isn't increasing our damage in any sort of way. I don't think it is, but it's always worth testing. We'll just keep our current Bond of Life because that also changes damage. So we have 1593 for this first shot here, when it criticals anyway. Now we're just going to get Noelle's shield here. Do it again. 1593, same damage. Let's give her Calamity of Eshu and see if her damage goes up with a Noelle shield. So we are now doing 854. Yeah, 854. The weapon's obviously level 1 and the difference won't be massive. We're just looking for if it's there. Let's get a shield and try again. 970, there you go. It actually does go up. I would assume the crit rate of this attack also goes up. It would be incredibly difficult to confirm, but I will try. It's basically a matter of giving her 92% crit rate and seeing if she ever doesn't critical. The hard part is knowing when enough is enough. We could technically critical infinite times. Set in stats don't matter. I'm just trying to get as much crit rate as possible. She can give herself 10% crit rate, but we're not going to be proccing this. So I got as close as I could. On average, 1 out of every 13 won't critical, but I'll do several just to be on the safe side. I'm also making sure while I'm attacking here, we do not have the 10% from our passive. They are all 419s. Like, this is at least the 5th skill I've done, and we can see, what, 15, 20 attacks there. Just for the sake of completeness, we'll try without Noelle's shield as well and see if we can spot some non-criticals. Oh, yep, there was one, a 190. Okay, cool. Yeah, all right, 3 entire Masanoris. Wait a second. What was that? I could have sworn I just saw a non-critical after actually hundreds of attacks, but I am almost certain that wasn't her normal. That was most likely the Surging Blade here, which I guess doesn't count as normal or charge attack. But with a 73 multiplier and a 10-second cooldown, I don't think, you know, that having less crit rate or damage is really cause for concern. Even so, I'm gonna do one more because I'm a little scared now. Yeah, I mean, without the shield, I just saw 2 non-crits in a row. 92 isn't 99.9, so I think, you know, seeing hundreds of attacks critical is enough to pretty confidently say this crit rate does go to those attacks, which is a big part of her kit. So yeah, let's start with Clorinde. I think it can be actually excellent for her. Yes, the buffs don't go to her burst, which can be strong, but it still pales in comparison to the damage she's doing with normal attacks. Sure, that drastically changed at C4, but I doubt there are any C4 Clorindes considering a 4-star weapon for her. It should go without saying it's not as good as her signature, but ignoring the main advantage 5 stars have, which is the base stats, I would dare to say the R5 passive on Calamity of Eshu is better than her signatures. Here we get 32 crit value for her main damage source versus only 20 general crit value, plus 40% damage bonus for her main source of damage versus 48% all damage bonus. I would trade 8 generic damage bonus for 12 crit value. Still though, because these buffs don't affect her burst, it's a lot more debatable. And again, that's just talking about the passive. Obviously the massive base attack here and the 44 crit damage removes the discussion. I just find it interesting that, you know, a free, just you gotta play the event, it's actually more accessible than forging as long as you actually actually do the event and don't miss it. Also, I do think Zhongli is a very good support for her, covering the shield requirement because she has very short uptime on her E, and you don't want to have to spend that time dodging attacks, so you can just face tank them while still going ham. What about everyone else? We do have 20 sword users. We're going to put a green little check mark on Clorinde because I think it can be used well on her. We first got to rule out supports that aren't that good at sub DPS with their intended playstyle. There are some edge cases like DPS physical Chi-Chi, I guess, but I'd rather not get into that right now. Of the ones that are left, Chiori, Farina, Lynette, Albedo, Xingqiu, and Kaya do most of their damage with skill or burst. Well, I'll put a maybe on Lynette because she is a 4-star and some people will have her C6. She can kind of sort of DPS then with her normals. I'm not super familiar with Lynette, so I'll just leave that there as a maybe. It'll be good for her option. Alhaitham I would say is another maybe. There are a few issues like him preferring elemental mastery over attack, and that generally normal and charge attacks aren't the biggest source of his damage. Some of his combos do use a lot more normal attacks, so I don't think it'd be useless for him. I think he can use it pretty well if you have nothing better, but I can't say it's outright good for him. Ayato, on the other hand, I'm going to give a check mark to. He's similar to Clorinde in that it is his elemental skill multiplier that he uses, but it's considered normal attack damage. So much like Clorinde, he should get those bonuses for his main source of damage as well. He also is primarily an attack scaler with some small buff with HP, so he actually prefers the attack substat, unlike Alhaitham. The main issue I see in Ayato's case is, well, it's Ayato, and secondly, the shield requirement. I don't think there are that many Ayato teams that have a dedicated shielder. Again, someone like Xeonin can do crystallize, but Ayato is pretty stationary while attacking, so I don't think it would last that long. Ayaka, I'm gonna put another maybe on. Her burst is most of her damage, but she does do some with normal and charged as well. She also appreciates the attack substat, but because in terms of damage, her burst is so much more prevalent, it's hard to give her a straight up check mark. And finally, Keqing, I think it's pretty safe to give her a check mark. I would consider her a classic normal / charge attack DPS. Even in the newer aggravate teams where EM is important, attack is still so. There's really not much else to say. She's obviously not the most meta unit anymore, but for newer players coming to the game, it very well could be their first 5-star DPS. And paired with this event weapon, I'd say she could actually be a very nice unit. I will say the shield requirement is a bit of a shame. Like, none of the characters I think it would be good for have any sort of shield mechanics in their kit, so it's something you'll always have to think about. Of course, if you're gonna take a shielder like Zhongli anyway, it doesn't matter. But yeah, overall, it is a very impressive weapon for it just being a free R5able. You don't even need like forging resources. Of course, to actually enhance it, you do, and you should always consider if these resources and the Mora and such is worth it. But at the very least, you should do the event and pick up the weapon. It might not be best in slot for anyone, but most people don't have 20 5-star swords like I do to choose from, or even some of the older event weapons. I would say one of the most promising use cases is Clorinde. If you just like got her C0, no weapon, you don't have a lot of alternatives, or you want to keep everyone else's signatures on them. We do have a ton of weapons by now, but for free to play or especially newer players, this can be a really good weapon on, you know, several sword users. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Dropping a like or subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed is always greatly appreciated as well. Thanks, as always, for watching, and until next time.